know it's fairly late there,
Okay,
and
maybe we should
I
start
do
without
think that when I start here to just
your
explain what
camera.
I do and why my perspective might be slightly differently than Johanna's, is that most of my work is done in two different ways with the International Association for Intercultural Education, where I am the editor-in-chief. Yes? Okay,
So, just wait a second, please. So I've been asked to
all right.
translate because
That's
it's a
not
little bit
uncommon for me.
difficult to
Basically,
follow
that
your speech because we
I
cannot
wear in
see
some
you.
ways in my work two hats. One
So I will need to
is with the
translate maybe
International
a
Association for
couple of
Intercultural Education,
sentences and then I need to
where I'm
translate.
vice president and also editor-in-chief of the journal Intercultural Education, and with the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam, which is an organization devoted to work in the area dealing with the Holocaust, dealing with genocide, dealing with human rights, and dealing with anti-discrimination. Very practical work. So on a day-to-day basis, my work is very much practical in classrooms, in schools, and working with young people. You might want to translate that. Okay. Now, I first want to address some of the, first I want to say also hello to Edward, because I think it's remarkable what Edward has been able to accomplish here. The amount of organization that went into this, the amount of communication that he's put into this. So I really appreciate that very much. And I know that has not been an easy task. So I want to thank Edward and congratulate him on this. Then to address what Johanna was saying, that many of her comments, and of course she has this history now of working both in Finland and working in the United States. I was born in the United States. I went through the education system in the United States until I was 14, and then moved to Europe. So, and I have worked in both, in Europe and in the United States, since I immigrated, and I have this immigration history from the US to the Netherlands. You need to translate that, or can I continue? You want me to continue? Oh, okay, that's very good. You're very fast. I would say I agree with her on the language issue. However, I would like to say at the same time, and this is a critical issue, I think, in intercultural education, polycultural education, multicultural education, the language issue. I think what she was referring to in trying to identify what's happening in Finland, which is quite different from most European countries, especially different from, let's say, anything south of Scandinavia. And I consider her description to also apply to Norway, to Finland, to Sweden as well, is this human rights base of the way that intercultural education is applied, or multicultural education, and also language education is applied. That these human rights standards and this human rights core is critical when this is being implemented in those particular countries. I had a particular situation when I almost migrated to Norway to work there, and my son, who was autistic, was also given, because of his human rights, the opportunity to be educated with a private tutor in his own language, as long as, and this is Norway, as long as 3 individuals, 3 children from a language community were represented in one particular area, they had the right to be educated in their own language. I didn't do it because Norway is too expensive. However, you do not find that in most of the rest of Europe. You would not find that in Germany. You would not find that in the Netherlands. You would not find that in France. That what you're seeing, because of the,
Okay, just give me a second, please.
say that context is extremely important. That what you have in the Nordic countries is this very much a very strong culture of respect, of appreciation, and it's
Okay,
less so,
go
I
on.
would say, in much of Europe these days, and there is at the moment less of a movement towards respecting the rights of immigrants and more towards a movement of nationalism. Extremely strong in the country, for instance, like right now in Hungary. It's extremely strong in Romania. It's in the Netherlands, where I happen to live, which is seen as being a very tolerant, very progressive place. Students with a migrant background or a migrant history do not have the right to learn in their own language. They also do not have the right in any way to receive education in that language. And in fact, the government may not spend 1 cent, not 1 penny, on mother tongue education. And you see this very strongly as well in our neighboring country, in Belgium. A lot of this is due to the context at the moment in much of this part of Europe, where you're seeing very strong nationalism on the rise. You're seeing right-wing parties. And I know that you had Nectaria Poliologu there. The right-wing parties in Golden Dawn in Greece is extremely strong at the moment. That you're seeing, because of the economic crisis, that there's less understanding, less willingness to work with migrant communities, to work with immigrant communities and diverse communities on trying to provide them with the kind of educational provision they need. You need that track?
Okay.
Now, Johanna mentioned that what's happening in the United States, that there's a great appreciation, that there's a culture, a sense of multiculturalism. I think I would agree that in many places this is the case in the United States. It's almost a given that your classroom will be multicultural in some way. However, there's also a very strong movement, a very strong anti-immigrant movement in the United States as well, and a very strong, she was referring to language, a very strong movement for English-only programs in places, for instance, like California. In fact, if you look at the international research, for instance, that's being done by the OECD and others, and there's something called the MIPEX Index, MIPEX. It shows basically that the Nordic countries in Europe, but especially Canada, do the best in making people from, let's say, with an immigrant background who have migrated in some way, feel that they belong, feel that they are part of society. So Canada, in many ways, is a good model, but very different, of course, from other countries. Getting to because there's been a lot of discussion here about definitions. And I know that Paul Gorski was also going to be part of this discussion. I know Paul extremely well, so I popped him a couple emails earlier about the concept of polycultural. And I think that it's an interesting concept, and I think it needs to be looked at more carefully. However, I do have to say that in my own personal opinion, that whether we're talking about polycultural, multicultural, intercultural, that oftentimes there's so much overlap. And even within people who use the term intercultural, or the people who use the term multicultural, they disagree considerably with each other. There is an entire movement within intercultural education, Paul Gorski is one of them, that considers most of us who do intercultural education to be naive. Why naive? Because I think that a distinction can be made both within multicultural education, intercultural education, and polycultural education, of those that place a great amount of emphasis on equity issues, on social justice issues, on access issues, on dealing with status differences and power in education, and power in classrooms. Who gets to speak? Who dominates? What is the role of the teacher? Does the teacher dominate, or do the students have a say? Are they given a voice? Are the parents given a voice? What is the relationship of the school to the community? Versus, so in one case where social justice and power is focused on. I don't know if that's something you need to interpret. And the other approach, I hear you talking and seeing, I don't know if I should continue. Yes. I look at 6 of them.
Okay, okay. No. Thank you so much. We have a question for you. So
I'm getting
it's
to those
very
next.
interesting,
Those
this
because
part
of
of
the
discussion.
polycultural nature.
But the
of some
question
of
is
this.
whether you had a
Let me
chance
just finish
just to
this
look through
very
the
quickly, and then I'll
projects
move on to the
which
projects.
have been created during those 2 days, and
So
whether you have any
that,
comments on them,
when I
because
look
we are
at
quite
most of the
interested to
projects,
see
I
your
also have 6,
comments.
by the way, that I was able to receive. 6 presentations, and not more than that. I went through them again this afternoon to see what they were. And
Okay. Okay.
no, no. I have 6. I have 6.
So,
I have 6
Barry,
of those.
we are not speaking about the video
I have 6
files uploaded to
6
the
PowerPoints
conference
that I
website.
received.
Edward
4 of them
means
dealing
the
with higher
PowerPoint
education.
presentations which
4
have
of them
been
dealing with
sent to
higher
you, whether you had a
education.
chance just to look through
And 2 of
them.
them, one of them dealing with 4th to 7th
So 6
grade,
PowerPoints
and one of them
of
dealing
today.
with preschool. Right. And I think if I look at those,
Yeah, 6 PowerPoints. Okay, so yeah, great.
right, I would say that some of those,
Yeah.
right, some of those I would place in the category of what I would call intercultural learning. What I mean by intercultural learning is
Okay,
the
exactly.
approach
So
by Milton Bennett, who
yes, you're right. So,
American but lives in Italy and works with the EFIL, European Federation for Intercultural Learning. And intercultural, in that particular tradition, there is little emphasis on social justice, little emphasis on power relations, and you have more of seeing distinct cultures and people from distinct cultural backgrounds who interact with each other and need to gain a certain amount of intercultural competence. And this is where the issue of intercultural competencies comes in. But that is a slightly different approach than some of the other projects that were mentioned here, which do talk about social justice. However, I think that social justice issues, if that is at the core of an intercultural education approach, are defined very differently depending on the context. Johanna mentioned the United States. The United States has its own particular history where, of course, you had a history of slavery. You have a history of occupation by Europeans, which goes back hundreds of years, back to Columbus. So you're talking about a history of, which is very different from a European history, where the real awareness of cultural differences and the real awareness of migration issues has been fairly recent. As she mentioned, and as some of the other speakers have mentioned in the past, I've looked at some of that. Many countries in Europe were countries that people emigrated away from. Now, if I look at, I'm going to switch a little bit what I'm saying here because I want to make it more concrete, because I'm looking at the time. Since I am the editor-in-chief, I'm going to make a concrete proposal here. Since I am the editor-in-chief of Intercultural Education, what I want to offer here, because I don't want to just leave this this discussion and leave it very abstract.
No,
I want to do something much more concrete. Johanna mentioned that people in Western Europe, people in the United States, say people in the West, are unfamiliar with what's happening in Russia in the area and the theories that are being proposed in Russia around these kinds of diversity issues. And I'm going to call them diversity issues. People are familiar, as she mentioned, with Leontiev, with Vygotsky. However, not, for instance, I was looking at the first article, just to name the first one, on multinational university, on the Krupnov technique. What I would like to do personally,
Mhm.
Yes? Yes.
Okay, so speaking about those, Barry,
I think this is
speaking
why I
about
was
those
talking about
6 projects,
context. I know that there are some issues in
did you
Russia as well
like
at the
any
moment.
of them?
My
So,
colleagues at the
do
Anne
you believe
Frankhaus are
that
working in Russia, and I know
any
that's
of
rather
them
difficult for NGOs at the
can be
moment. I
implemented
know that
in the
there's been some
nearest future?
legislation passed around LGBTQ issues in Russia. So I know that it's not the easiest environment, the easiest political environment to apply some of the projects that people might want to. However, I think that the 6 that have been presented and that I was reading do stand a chance. I think every single one of them, 4 of them at the higher education level, I think every single one of them can be applied, although I think they are fairly, my own comment would be to start with first steps, to start with um, things that are feasible, that don't take a lot of resources, that don't take changing the entire university culture to make them feasible. But to try to identify what those first steps are. Right at the moment, I'm about to embark on a very large project in Sao Paulo in Brazil, in 2,000 schools in Brazil, together with the Ministry of Education. And even with the support of the Ministry of Education, we've decided to take those first steps that build on what already exists in these particular higher education institutions and also exist in these schools, and try to take those first steps and identify who needs to be involved in making that happen. So I think that many of the projects are fairly ambitious. I think that's the first thing I noticed. However, if I look, for instance, at the Sakhalin University proposal, which focuses on empowerment, I think that's something that's very critical. Trying to empower students and also teachers from minority backgrounds. I have a little bit of an issue with some of the language that I see in some of the proposals, although I do feel that that could be part of the translation problem. I had a sense in reading in general through these projects that there was a little bit of an emphasis on people from different backgrounds, minority backgrounds, needing to adapt, needing to adjust, that it was very much from one side, that it was not, so it's for instance, the last project on the adaptation of foreign students, that it was very much about the foreign students who need to adapt. And of course, people who migrate, people who come to a university in another country, need to adjust to the particular learning environment at that university. But I think that it has to be from 2 sides, and it has to come from both the majority and the minority. In order for the minority students to feel comfortable in a university setting, this is the situation for 4 of these proposals. In order for them to feel comfortable, I think that it's important to also focus equally on the majority students. And there was one comment about immigration. This is the 3rd one, on inter-ethnic conflicts, which looks at 4th to 7th grade students, and they talk about 15 ethnicities that are in the school. My question immediately is, if you have 15 ethnicities in the school, to what extent is the teacher body also reflecting those ethnicities? My experience throughout the United States and Western Europe is almost never. If you look at the teacher body, it's almost not reflected at all. And I think that's something to keep in mind when doing research and implementing projects, that if we're looking at the extent to which young people and students are going to integrate, if we call that, or feel that they belong to the university culture or the student culture, we need to also look at the teacher body, and to what extent does that also reflect what's happening among the student body in terms of ethnicity. I saw in that particular proposal immigration described as a problem, and I think that since I publish in the journal if we look at a total about 50 articles a year, I see that, I think, as a drawback in many ways in which intercultural, polycultural projects are defined, that immigration is seen as the cause of problems where immigration is seen as the most problematic issue that has to be dealt with. I think that a way of viewing that is that what is really at stake here and what the real problem is the inability of the education system to adjust, and that's what needs to adjust, the education system adjusting to the presence of people with a different background in the particular institutions. So that I'm much more in favor of looking carefully at that language than looking at the differences between how the polycultural and intercultural, multicultural might be defined. So how do we conceptualize what the problem is, and how do we conceptualize what the solution might be? I think that each one of these projects, like I said, I think is quite interesting, can be implemented, although I find them to be quite ambitious. I would love to see them succeed, and I think that starting, because you have 4 of these that are at the university level in higher education, I would love to see them succeed at that level first, because, and I think that 2 of them, if I remember correctly, are dealing with future teachers, so pre-service teachers, and I think that is the core level where change needs to take place. These pre-service teachers, as they are forming their opinions, as they are gaining their new skills, that if at that level we can make a change there as educators, then we can guarantee that in the future that these particular teachers will have the intercultural competencies, will have the knowledge, will have the skills, will have the methodologies that they can apply when they move into schools. If I can just close, because of the time, what I wanted to offer Edward and offer you there as the editor-in-chief of the journal Intercultural Education. Like I said, people are not aware of what's happening in Russia. I'd like to offer for 2014, seems far away but it's not, to do a special issue of the journal Intercultural Education on what is happening in Russia. So what are the main theories? Not just what are the main theories, but how, for instance, does the Krugell technique compare to what Milton Bennett proposes? Because the 2 seem to be somewhat similar, but quite different. To what extent do the new people, say from the philosophy of education, philosophy of intercultural, polycultural education, to what extent do their insights in the way that they define what the problems are, what the solutions are, how we should move forward in this field, how does that, for instance, differ or compare to Paulo Freire? How does that compare to Henri Giroux? That's something I would like to see theoretically, a few articles, and then some more concrete articles as to what's happening at the preschool level. How are teachers dealing with, very concretely, how are they dealing with the presence of diversity at the preschool level? How are they dealing with some of these tensions that are, for instance, identified in that 3rd project on interethnic conflicts? How are they dealing with these tensions in these schools, and to what extent does that compare or relate to what is happening in other parts of the world? So that brings in, to a certain extent, comparative education as well. And I know you didn't get a chance to really translate very much of that. So there's my concrete proposal. I find it extremely interesting what you're doing there. I think that the projects that are being proposed are extremely interesting, have a good chance of success, and I would very much like to give my 2 cents worth to really assist in that effort by allowing, when these projects are underway, through analysis, research analysis, to publish about them in the journal in about 2 years' time. And I will set aside a special issue for that. And I'll leave my comments at that.
Okay, we do appreciate your comments. Thank you so much. And now we
I
have
hope Edward
just
heard my proposal as well.
several minutes left, and we have just the last speaker. So thank you so much. There is no time for the questions, unfortunately. So we may contact you later, I guess, if we have any questions.
Okay,
Don't you mind?
thank you.
Okay, and so we just have some time for a couple of comments of the last presenter, Paul Laundry. Okay. Thank you so much.